Got as much meat as about a raisin, just face it. While I'm steady on the track, you with your bags at the station. What I'm rated, S-class minimum. You said.
Welcome to 3-Count Commentaries. Today we're going to be talking about the absolutely fantastic biography of Rey Mysterio. I didn't really do any supplemental reading for this, so it's probably going to be fairly short. To me, the best part of this documentary was really the first hour, the first half hour to the first hour. Just learning about his everything. Because in that first half hour, you learn about not just his family, but his uncle. You learn about AAA. You learn about Conan. You just learn as much about a bunch of people who are not talked about a lot. So they use Rey as a wonderful spearhead to introduce you to Lucha Libre in general. And then, of course, he's a prodigy. This is a guy who was started training at 8 years old under his uncle, who was his mother's brother, Rey Mysterio Sr. So this was tremendous. Rey Mysterio Sr. had trained Conan, and Conan met Rey when Rey was a real little boy. And he was the one who got Rey everywhere. He was Rey's golden ticket. If you took Conan, eventually you had to get Rey. You know, and it was tremendous. And having Conan in here to add that color to it was phenomenal. You know, just nothing that you could say about this thing that was negative. You know, there was some stuff that they skipped over that I wish they hadn't. But overall, tremendous. Also, due to time constraints, we will be adding Rivals to the end of this as well. So we're going to add the Rivals episode, even though it's just kind of an extended episode of something that they actually already discussed in this documentary. But I really, really enjoyed the first hour, an hour and a half of the Rey Mysterio biography. It was very good. So you learn a lot about Tijuana, where his parents came from. And he was born in California. His parents had illegally immigrated to the United States. And he was born in San Diego. Not too long after he was born, they moved back to Tijuana so that his father could work. He had 3 brothers, went to school in San Diego for a little while before they went back to Tijuana. His uncle, became the Rey Mysterio in 1975. And the family was a big supporter of him. And, you know, the style, you know, everybody was a fan of Lucha Libre. And he said that his uncle didn't have any children at the time. So he was like his uncle's son. And he was with his uncle all the time and wanted to be just like him. So that's very interesting. So Rey started working at a pizza parlor and training part-time when he was about 8 years old. At this point in time, Conan, the big Cuban, he comes to Rey Sr. to get trained, and he meets Rey Jr. there, and he kind of takes him under his wing as like a little brother. And they talk about Rey's training, which was, of course, as usual, old school wrestling in the 80s, violent, and he's getting chopped hard by his uncle, and, you know, his uncle not cutting him any slack. No slack whatsoever. And he talked about how he would go in the corner and cry and wait for his uncle to show up to make him feel better. And he said he was toughened up because his uncle never came. So his uncle never came to make sure he was okay after he was getting chopped in the chest and and everything. So I thought that was great. And some people would say that, oh, and he was abused. Like, well, he wanted to do this. How badly do you really want it, kid? So when he was 14, he wanted to have his first match, but you had to be 18. His parents didn't really believe that he was going to do this. They thought it was kind of silly. They weren't really into it, but his dad signed the permit anyway. So, of course, WWE had incredible footage, and that's really one of those things that I loved, is we got to see Rey Mysterio Sr., his wall of masks, and all of the photos and stuff that he had of himself. So you got to learn a lot about him too. And they had tremendous amount of footage on Rey. Like they got the footage from his very first match in Tijuana, which was outside of a church. for about 100 people. Ray looks like a bobblehead doll. I mean, he's just so little. And, he's wearing this mask, and he was going by the Green Lizard name. I don't know what it was in Spanish, but it was before Colibri. And he started wrestling as a young boy, like a really young boy. And he wanted to be Rey Mysterio Jr. right out of the gate, but he was told by Rey Sr., you got to earn that. It's going to take a while. You weren't ready for the name yet. So at 14, he was actually pushed to drink beer because everybody was wondering, like, he was just too damn small. And he would work matches in bars because he wasn't old enough to work, and people were all so concerned about his size. And Conan would try to, backdoor him, essentially. Conan would come in, he's a big, strong guy, and he would always say, I know this guy, man. He's tremendous, but he's just short. And like, well, you don't mention his name. You don't mention how short he is, So he would sneak Ray in to get Ray work, which was awesome. We learned that Rey Mysterio Sr., who is Ray's uncle, that he fell in love with Lucha Libre at the age of 9. He was a fan of El Santo, the Babe Ruth of Lucha Libre. They talked about mass culture, how it comes from the Mayan and Aztecs, warrior cultures. That was just excellent stuff. You could do a full documentary just on that. Of course, like I said, Ray looked fragile. Promoters were kind of afraid to book him, which led to the whole idea of Conan sneaking him into bars. Tijuana Auditorium is where Ray Jr. is actually born now. He's been working for 3 years. He goes in front of a crowd as Colibri, and Ray Sr. announces him as Rey Mysterio Jr. and changes his mask. And it looked like a really awesome little ritual there. Of course, it was lovely. It was lovely, and now he has to carry the Mysterio name. So then we meet Angie. Ray is 15 when he meets Angie. Angie is 17. She has a boyfriend who is a med student, and she about to marry a punk pro wrestler. It was interesting. Angie didn't like wrestling, was never really a fan, thought that it was too low class. Over time, she kind of moved away from the other guy and started dating Ray. Ray tells a funny story of meeting Angie's parents and said that he was 15 but looked 12. And he's like coming around hitting on their daughter and everything. I thought that was fun. So they live in Tijuana, I guess, if I remember correctly. Ray is still working at the pizza parlor. He doesn't really have much money. Conan hears about AAA, and it's in Mexico City. And he ends up talking to, and Ray's like, I can't go because my parents will never let me go. Then I got this thing with Angie, and I got a job. And I love that Conan was in the biography to say that there was nothing he was going to say that was going to change my mind. He had to go with me. Basically, I'll talk to your parents. I'll talk your parents into letting you go. And if Angie loves you, she'll wait for you. And I can guarantee you that you're going to make more money working in this place than you will working at that pizza parlor. So he had an answer for everything that Ray may have thrown at him. So they actually showed some really great home pictures of Ray with like a pompadour and everything to it. Like, it was ridiculous. It was great shit. At first, I was still kind of unnerved by the idea of Ray, without his mask on. But then I kind of realized, like, they're kind of banking on children not really watching this. They're banking on people who already know Ray's been unmasked to watch this. So Conan talks Ray's parents into letting him go to Mexico City. Ray is 17 at this point. They're living in Mexico City with no food and no money. They're living in a gym. And they're ready to give up because AAA just hasn't started yet. And nothing is really going on. Angie is working. And she's sending money to Ray to help him take care of his wrestling dreams. And then AAA finally kicks off in Veracruz. Antonio Pena sees Ray Jr. and is absolutely appalled. Thinks his punches look like shit. So he's putting him in there. He's constantly getting beat up. He doesn't look legitimate. And so Pena says he wants to put him with the minis because he's so small and his offense doesn't really look very good. So he was like, well, we'll put him with the minis. And Conan went to bat for him, like, no, you can't do that. You got to give him a chance. You got to let him, give him some time. And Ray was talking about going back to the wall and learning how to throw a punch by punching the wall. I think Rob Van Dam said he did the same thing, that he learned how to punch from punching walls. And he was trying to learn form. And you also learn how hard to hit things by punching the wall. I've heard wrestlers doing that before. So he managed to not get put into the minis, the mini division. And he made the Worlds Collide AAA pay-per-view, which is famous for introducing the world to Eddie Guerrero and Art Barr. So this was excellent. Paul Heyman, of course, is paying attention to this. Heyman is interested in Lucha Libre at this point. Conan is brought into ECW, and from there we just get the same story again and again. Conan goes into a place. He starts talking about Ray and Psychosis and Juventud Guerrera and all these guys. And eventually Paul Heyman relents and bring these guys in. And they're using the extreme Lucha Libre where they're doing tables and jumping off of cars and everything. And Heyman's mind is blown, and he wants more of these guys. He wants them to do more stuff. But of course, Conan leaves, and they kind of leave with him. Conan goes to WCW, and of course, he uses his power brokering skills to get his boys into WCW. So Ray, his first match is Great American Bash 1996. And he said, you remember coming into the locker room and people making fun of him. Then he has that first match, and he's sort of blowing everybody away. Like he's still kind of being made fun of because he is so small. He's ridiculously small. But his athleticism is making up for it. And, even Hulk Hogan is like, well, yeah, he takes advantage of being small by being very quick and very athletic. And Terry Taylor liked that Rey Mysterio didn't have an ego. That, he didn't have a problem, doing anything that you asked him to do. And it just brings us to the lawn dart segment where apparently I think Ray wanted to go through the window and Nash said, no, there's too much glass and everything. So he threw him into the side of the cart or whatever. And of course he put over how Ray sold it so well, but it's like, did he really have a choice? What are you going to do if you didn't have your head banged against the goddamn side of the wall? So, of course, this is where he says he met Eddie Guerrero for the first time and really got to work with him. And we all kind of know the story from here that he, works with Eddie in 1997. They have a match on Nitro. The match on Nitro begins the story with Eddie becoming obsessed with Ray and wanting to steal his mask, which, of course, leads to the Halloween Havoc match. And the one angle that I think that was added to this story that I didn't know is that Bischoff wanted him to lose his mask here. Bischoff was obsessed with taking away the masks of all the luchadors. They didn't mention that he had already unmasked Juventud Guerrera in a similar situation, and Juvi was not really rewarded for losing his mask. I think he was the first one to lose his mask in WCW. I don't think Psychosis lost his mask in WCW. I don't remember him losing his mask in WCW. I'm sure Ray and Juvi did, because I saw that. And I'm pretty sure Juvi was the first. And Juvi didn't become like a top guy after he snatched his mask. He lost his mask to Chris Jericho, for those of you who didn't know. In a storyline where he was pretty much humiliated. But Bischoff just thought that you could relate to the luchadors better if they were not masked, that you could relate to them, you could see their faces, you could see them emote, and all the conventional pro wrestling stuff, and admitted that he was kind of ignorant of the culture. And Ray was threatening to no-show if they didn't change their mind on him losing the mask, because he really was against losing his mask. And he got threatened with a lawsuit, but at the same time he's going to be in breach of contract, but he didn't care. So thankfully Eddie stepped in and just offered to do the job, to get the match in the ring. So that's how, Ray ended up winning the Cruiserweight title from Eddie, because he wanted to protect Ray from getting sued. And Ray didn't want to, let his family down and and lose his mask. So this is kind of where we're going to kind of blend in a little bit of that Rivals stuff, because Rivals kind of course, told more of the story of how they, went from WCW to WWE, and they started out as a tag team. For the first time, they really got to work together as a tag team. I think they worked together a little bit in the LWO. They think they did some stuff there too. That's never introduced into like Rivals and stuff. And in Rivals, they also didn't talk about the match they had for the WWE Championship when Eddie was the champion and he defended against Ray. So the storyline that they created, they had concocted that Eddie couldn't beat Ray, wasn't entirely true. And he beat Ray to end that storyline. He beat him in the cage match, which was after the ladder match that they had. But they didn't really add much of anything extra to the story at that point, and we jump back to the biography because at this point, they're setting up Ray to lose his mask. So they put Miss Elizabeth's hair on the line. And now it's a situation where you can't just have the other people agree to do jobs because Elizabeth's got to have to get her head shaved. And they really put over how losing his mask was like losing his identity. And Ray says after he lost his mask that, he felt like he had let his fans down, but more importantly, he felt like he let his family down, especially his uncle. And of course, they talked about how terrible it was. And Conan was still pretty angry about it. Bischoff said, given the context of everything, he still would have made that same decision. That means, granted, he didn't know how important it was. But I can tell you, even if he knew that it was important, which of course he had to have known. Again, this guy worked with luchadors. You think that the mask was only important to Ray? Like, no, like all of these guys had the same feeling about their masks, None of them wanted to lose their masks. And Bischoff just kept pushing for these guys to lose their masks. And they made it even worse as they showed the B-roll footage of WCW of Nash making fun of him after he got unmasked. So, like, Nash, like, putting the mask on his head and stuff like that. Just really humiliating, stupid shit. Then they started saying how, Ray was doing the giant killer gimmick where he would beat guys much bigger than him, like Bam Bam Bigelow and Kevin Nash. That didn't last very long. Regardless of what people think, that didn't last very long at all. It may have happened, but it didn't last very long. He spent most of his time in a tag team after that. And he said, like, the next night he got to wrestle Kevin Nash, and he ended up winning the match, but he felt naked afterwards. The biography did a good job of talking about how he was not a stereotypical WWE guy. Like, they love that narrative. And in this instance, it was perfect because Ray's smaller than even the average not WWE ready performer. And Vince basically told him, hey, we're not interested. We're just going to let your contract run out. Just keep collecting your paychecks. And, it is what it is. At this point, Angie is pregnant with Aaliyah, and Ray is kind of bitter about not having a job. And you can see Ray off camera telling Angie to tell the people how he wasn't a good husband at this point in time. Like, he wants the dirt out there, like he's like, tell him it was no good. Tell him I suck. And she says basically that Ray was giving her a hard time while she was pregnant. And then as soon as they had the C-section and Aaliyah was born, his mood pretty much changed and he kind of went back to being normal. And then JR tells the story that Vince is always obsessed with Mighty Mouse and always wanted to have a Mighty Mouse character on WWE TV, a smaller superhero style character. And, Paul Heyman later on is the one who kind of introduces the Rey Mysterio concept. Like, Rey Mysterio could be that guy. And Vince kind of goes with it. So Heyman is the one who calls for Rey Mysterio to come to SmackDown. And Ray finds out about this through vignettes on TV. Apparently he must not have known that they decided to pick up his contract and not let it to run out. And so now he's on SmackDown. So they kind of washed over a lot of stuff that, happened in the early years, of course, him being cruiserweight champion and everything. Heyman very intelligently says, as they were talking about the mask, and Sam Roberts is like, through the vignettes, you get the idea that the mask is coming back. And, they're like, wait a minute, in Mexican culture, you can't really do that. You can't really remove your mask and then put it back on and be the same person. Like, you can't really just do that. But Ray did it. And because WWE has such stroke in the industry that, they was able to sort of maneuver around traditional Mexican culture. And Paul Heyman says, it's not that we were smart enough to put the mask back on him. It's that we weren't stupid enough to keep the mask off. Which I think was great. You keep the package, There's one time where Vince actually did something that made sense. And it was obviously he had to be, I'm pretty sure he got his arm twisted in order to get this thing to work. So here is an interesting time because up to this point, Conan has been, carrying Ray pretty much everywhere he went. But in WWE, there is no Conan, so Eddie kind of takes over as his mentor. But Eddie has problems with drugs and alcohol, and they have these deep concerns, and Ray kind of flounders without Eddie. So, of course, the story, Eddie gets fired, he comes back, then they cook up this idea. He said Ray and Eddie were sitting in the jacuzzi talking about life and everything, and next thing you know, this storyline is concocted with Bruce Pritchard read Eddie Guerrero's book about him having a child out of wedlock while he was separated from Vicky. Now, in real life, that is his youngest daughter, I believe. But Pritchard decides to use that as a springboard for the storyline for the custody of Dominic. And it's a storyline that has a lot of mixed feelings into it. But for me, I loved it. I think this is a fantastic story because it's bullshit. It's absolute absurdity and it's entertaining as hell. So Dominic is 7 years old at this point. This is 2005. He got to skip school a lot to be involved with the storyline. We learned from the Rivals episode that he's actually offered money and that Ray gave him the opportunity to sort of back out if he didn't really want to do it. But, he was like, hey, that's a lot of candy and toys. I'm going to be paid for this. So yeah, let's do it. So he's a little kid and he's all involved with this. I love the Rivals episode because you get to hear from like Sasha Banks and Bayley and how much they love Eddie Guerrero. And Bayley talked a lot about Dominic, how sad he looked when he was a little boy and how you just kind of want to give him a hug because he got the sad puppy dog eyes. And it's like, yeah, that is very true. That is very true. So jumping back to the biography, Ray's parents think the storyline is stupid, but wrestling is a story. It is what it is. Sam Roberts is like, this is one of the worst storylines in WWE history. I vehemently disagree with Sam Roberts, but said that you put it in the hands of two of the greatest, and therefore it became sort of this iconic storyline. Of course, Eddie Guerrero dies in 2005. They kind of didn't talk a lot about the tribute show where he wrestled Shawn Michaels, but I think that would have been a great talk because Ray said, I think in an interview, that he believes that the giant killer gimmick that he did in WCW actually led Vince to thinking it was okay for him to wrestle bigger wrestlers like Kurt Angle and Benoit and those guys. Even though I'm pretty sure Heyman's influence also kind of led to some of that stuff too. But he was actually, was able to show in WCW, even though he didn't do it for very long, that he could wrestle bigger guys in believable matches. So Ray finds out about Eddie's passing at the arena. Of course, he's destroyed. He's distraught. They go into a lot more of that on the Rivals episode. They talk a lot about the Royal Rumble 2006, his run from there to WrestleMania. They did skip over the whole Eddie's in hell line from Randy Orton. They didn't even explain why Randy Orton was in that match. I still maintain that it should have been Kurt Angle versus Rey Mysterio 1-on-1. Why they even felt the need to add Randy Orton made no sense to me. Even today, outside of, they liked Randy and they didn't know what else to do with him. That match should have just been Ray versus Kurt Angle one-on-one. It'd probably be a much better, much more fondly remembered match if it had been. But he wins the World Heavyweight title, and his uncle says, look, I planted the seed here in Mexico. He took it and spread it all over the world. And I think that was probably one of the strongest endorsements that you can get. His parents are instantly proud of him, and everybody's so incredibly happy. We had some interesting talk about his injuries, about how bad his left knee is. He's had 10 surgeries on his left knee. And his family is legitimately kind of excited when he's injured, because that means he's going to be home a lot more. And that's very morbid. It might be true, but it's morbid as hell. We learned in 2008 he started abusing pain medications, which nobody knew. I didn't know about this at all. I know he got busted for steroids. I think it was around the same time, wasn't it? But he got, he said that the pain medication wasn't just numbing his knees, it was also numbing his brain. And he wasn't doing his job as a family man. And Angie told him to go to rehab. WWE sent him to rehab 28 days. Later, he never took pain medication again. And at this point, Dominic said he should be retired. That he thinks Ray should be retired even today. That he's surprised Ray's still doing this. Then he started talking about how stem cells in 2014, 2019, and 2020 have led to him feeling rejuvenated. They actually took some time out to talk about stem cells. Like it's they did a PSA for stem cells. It basically is like, hey, you probably should do it. You'll feel so much better if you do stem cells. They actually talked about Pedro Aguayo Jr., which is something I didn't think they would actually discuss on here, but Pedro Aguayo Jr. is the guy who passed away in the match with Rey Mysterio. He had a cervical injury. He died, and Rey missed the 619, but I think the injury that occurred before the 619 anyway. Apparently, him and Rey had a friendship going back to their to AAA. The family was there, the entire Mysterio family, and I love the shot of Rey walking through the Tijuana Auditorium here. I think that's what it was, and he was pointing out all of the guys who had passed away and all of the other guys that he knew while he was there. And he felt guilty after Pedro Aguayo died. He kind of blamed himself for it. And I know a lot of other people did too. Like that was some awful shit that people kind of blamed him for. But he said he went to the funeral without his mask on to kind of prove that he was a human being. And was given sort of the blessing of the family to keep going. So then we get a little bit on Dominic, as in 2018, Ray returns. So he says that basically his heart was in WWE. That's why he came back. And now his son had begun training. At this point, Dominic is 18 or 19 years old. Angie says that Dominic showed no interest in wrestling until almost exactly that time. And that she wasn't sure Dominic was going to even want to be a wrestler. Because Ray started wrestling young, so he figured Dominic would want to wrestle young too. So Ray decides to put Dominic through the ringer. He gives him the Conan, see if he got something. And then at that point, they start doing stuff with him. To get WWE to start doing some angles with Dominic. And that was fun. The grandparents, though, was like, oh no, the suffering begins again. They're not big fans of wrestling, and Dominic says that he knows that his dad's going through all these struggles and with all these knee surgeries and everything, all these injuries, that he's going through it for him. That he's going through it to help him launch his career until Dominic is at some point ready to take over as with the Mysterio name. So they kind of end the show talking about WrestleMania 38 and their gear, which is made by Ray's friend Hayashi in Japan, who makes all the masks and the wrestling gear. And he's the one who made the Love Machine art bar jacket for Dominic as a tribute for Dominic's first WrestleMania. And it was really cool how the guy flew in from Japan to give Ray the gear. And it was amazing. It was awesome. So Dominic at the end talks about how Ray is a huge inspiration and how he should be all of the heads on Mount Rushmore in different masks. And Ray says that, hey, all I wanted was a chance. All I wanted was an opportunity to show people what I could do. And he was glad to finally get it. So that was cool. I loved both Rivals and Biography this week. It was just, I'm a huge fan of Rey Mysterio. Ray to me was such an immaculate performer. He was smooth, but he also had intensity. You could also see the fire in his movements. He sold very well. In the WCW, he never got a chance to talk. He never got a chance to do much of anything other than just wrestle matches. So it was difficult for him to get over there. He just had to be spectacular, which thankfully he was. So, but in WWE, I became a huge fan of Ray because he actually talked more. Even though his promos weren't great, he talked more and you got to know him a little bit more. So I'm a huge fan of Rey Mysterio, and he's one of the GOATs to me. I love this biography. I love this episode of Rivals. So let me know what you guys think. Like, share, subscribe. I'll talk to you guys later, man. Peace out.